The morning mist rolled gently off the hills, wrapping my land in a cool, soft haze. The sun was just starting to peek over the tree line, washing the fields in a golden hue. My old John Deere tractor coughed to life, rumbling with that deep, satisfying growl that made me smile every time I turned the key. The smell of diesel and damp earth filled the air as I got back to work hauling logs for the new fence line. Out here, miles from the city, peace had a sound, the steady hum of machinery, the distant call of crows, and the rustle of wind through pine needles. It was the kind of life I'd worked hard to build. Simple, quiet, and mine. But peace doesn't last long when a woman like Karen Whitmore decides you're standing in the way of her perfect little world. Even before I saw her, I heard her. That sharp, cutting voice carried down the gravel road like nails on a chalkboard. "George Tanner," she shouted, her heels clicking across the dirt like she owned it. I didn't even bother turning off the engine. I knew that tone, knew that self-righteous bark. Karen was the kind of person who thought clipboards made her powerful. I finally shut the tractor off when I saw her marching up to the fence, sunglasses perched high, lips pursed in disapproval. Her tiny white dog yapped at her feet, wearing a rhinestone collar that glittered in the morning light. She was dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Pressed slacks, floral blouse, and a shiny HOA name tag pinned proudly to her chest. "You can't have that thing sitting here," she barked, pointing a manicured finger at my tractor like it was some kind of monster. "The HOA has very strict regulations about property appearances. You're in violation." I wiped my hands on my jeans, trying not to laugh. Violation. "Karen, this is a working farm, and that thing happens to be a tractor. What do you expect me to use, a wheelbarrow?" Her nostrils flared. "Don't be smart with me, George. The Homeowners Association is expanding to include Pine Creek Road. We voted last week. You'll be receiving your notice in the mail any day now." I leaned against the fence post, watching her like I'd watch a wild animal that didn't realize it was cornered. You can't just decide to expand an HOA onto private property without consent. That's not how the law works. She gave a smug little smirk, the kind of look that said she thought she was smarter than everyone else. "We'll see what the county says about that. It's for the community's benefit. Property values, beautification, order," she said, "order," like it was sacred scripture. "Karen," I said calmly, "you can do what you want inside your subdivision, but out here, the land's mine. Been in my family for 50 years. I don't answer to your committee." Her expression hardened, and that fake sweetness she usually wore like perfume evaporated. "You think you're above the rules," she snapped. "You'll regret saying no to me, George." I just shook my head and went back to work. Karen wasn't worth the breath it took to argue. She stood there for a few more minutes, probably expecting me to bow to her authority, but when she realized I wasn't going to, she stormed back to her shiny SUV. Gravel kicked up behind her as she peeled away, her little dog barking out the window. By sundown, I'd forgotten about her. The stars came out bright that night, the kind of clear sky only the countryside gets. I poured myself a drink, sat on the porch, and listened to the crickets. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills you with peace and makes you thankful you live far from people like Karen. But sometime around midnight, that peace shattered. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a strange crackling sound carried through the night air. Then the smell hit me. Smoke. Not the soft smell of a campfire or wood stove. This was thick chemical, and my heart dropped. I grabbed my boots and ran outside. The night was glowing orange at the edge of the field. Flames danced high into the sky, wild and hungry, twisting around the silhouette of my tractor. "No, no, no," I shouted, sprinting toward it. Heat rolled off the blaze in waves, pushing me back. The tires had already melted, the metal body glowing red hot. I grabbed the hose, turned the nozzle, and sprayed with everything I had, but the flames barely flinched. The crackle grew louder, the fire greedier. The smell of burning oil filled my nose, and black smoke poured into the stars. By the time it was done, nothing was left but a heap of charred steel and smoldering ash. My father's old John Deere, the one we'd used together when I was a kid, the one he'd restored by hand before he passed, was gone. I stood there, hands trembling, the hose limp in my grip. The only sound was the soft hiss of cooling metal and my own rag breathing. My throat burned, but not just from the smoke, from anger. Deep, slow-burning anger. I walked the perimeter, my flashlight cutting through the dark. That's when I saw the tracks, small, clean tire marks leading from the main road down toward the field. I crouched beside them. Compact SUV tires, maybe a crossover. Not many of those came through here, especially not at night. And then I saw it, a small, silver pin glinting in the dirt. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was round, polished, with the letters OA engraved across the front in fancy lettering. I didn't need to think twice. I knew who it belonged to. Karen Whitmore. Of course she'd make it personal. She'd threatened me that morning, too blinded by her own pride to realize she'd crossed a line she couldn't come back from. I stood in the flickering light of the dying fire, the pin clutched tight in my hand. I could feel the weight of my badge hanging around my neck under my shirt, the same badge I didn't flaunt around town, because I didn't need to. Karen thought I was just some stubborn landowner, a man with a tractor and too much land for his own good. She thought she could intimidate me, bully me, and get away with it because that's what people like her did. They pushed until they thought you'd break. But she'd made one mistake. She didn't know who she was dealing with. As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the charred field, I slid the pin into a plastic evidence bag from my truck, my hands steady now. The fire might have destroyed my tractor, but it had lit something else in me, a fire of my own. By the time the sun rose fully, I'd already decided exactly what was going to happen next. Because Karen hadn't just messed with a farmer. She'd committed arson. And I wasn't just George Tanner, the man she thought she could bully. I was Sheriff George Tanner, and the law wasn't on her side anymore. The morning after the fire felt heavier than usual. The smell of smoke still clung to the air, soaked into the soil, into my clothes, into everything I owned. The tractor was nothing more than a twisted skeleton of blackened metal now, lying silent in the field like a fallen giant. I stood there, coffee in hand, staring at what used to be a piece of my father's legacy. He'd restored that tractor himself. Back when I was a boy, every bolt, every piece of faded green paint meant something. Losing it felt personal, like someone had come after more than just a machine. They'd come after my bloodline, my pride, my peace. My deputy, Jake Morales, pulled up in his cruiser just after sunrise. He was young, sharp, loyal, still had that idealistic shine about the badge. He climbed out, eyes wide as he took in the wreckage. "Damn, Sheriff," he muttered. "Looks like a war zone." "Yeah," I said quietly. "A war started by one woman with too much time on her hands." He frowned, pulling out his notepad. "You really think it was her?" "The HO lady." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the clear evidence bag. Inside was the silver HOA pin I'd found near the tire tracks. Jake took one look at it and let out a low whistle. "Well, that's about as subtle as a confession," he said. "You want me to check her plates? Maybe pull her address?" I sipped my coffee and looked out at the rising sun. "No need. I know exactly where she'll be, probably setting up her morning meeting, pretending like she runs this town." He smirked. "Guess we're paying the OA a visit then." "Was so," I said, setting my cup on the truck's hood. "And Jakey, make sure your body cam's rolling. This one's gonna be interesting." The drive to the Pine Creek subdivision was quiet, just the crunch of gravel under the tires. It was one of those communities built for people who thought perfection was a personality trait. Manicured lawns, mailbox posts painted white, every house looking identical except for the slightly different shade of beige on the siding. The kind of place where the grass had to be exactly 2 inches high, and the fences all matched like they'd been pasted from a catalog. We pulled up near the community park, where a few folding tables were already set up. Karen Whitmore stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, barking orders at 2 other HOA board members. She was wearing a pale yellow blouse this time, with pearls around her neck, and that same polished smile that fooled just about everyone who didn't know better. When she saw my patrol truck roll up, her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she put it back on, that tight, fake grin she used when she wanted to look innocent. "Well, good morning, Sheriff Tanner," she said sweetly as I stepped out. "Here to buy a ticket for the community raffle." Jake snorted under his breath. "Not today, Karen," I said evenly, sliding my sunglasses off. "We're here on official business." Her eyes flicked to the badge on my chest, then back to my face. "Official business," she repeated, her voice going just a shade higher. "Surely this can wait until after our meeting." "Afraid not," I said. "We're investigating an act of arson that took place on my property last night." Her smile cracked. "Oh my goodness. That's terrible. Who would do such a thing?" "That's what we're trying to find out." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the evidence bag. The silver HOA pin gleamed in the morning light. "We found this near the scene." She froze. Her gaze flickered down to it, and for a moment I saw something flicker behind her eyes, panic, guilt, maybe both. Then she caught herself and forced another laugh. "That's hardly proof of anything, Sheriff. Those pins are common. Anyone could have dropped it." "Sure," I said calmly. Except the tire tracks leading from the scene matched the tread of a compact SUV, like your white Lexus parked right over there. Jake tilted his head toward the car. You want us to get a tread comparison, Sheriff? I nodded slowly. Yeah, go ahead. And while you're at it, check for accelerant residue near the wheel wells. Karen's voice went up an octave. This is ridiculous! I had nothing to do with any fire! You can't just accuse me because you're upset about some old tractor? Actually, I said, stepping closer, I can. You made a public threat yesterday morning in front of multiple witnesses. You said, and I quote, "You'll regret this, George." That sound about right? Her face went pale. The other HOA members started to inch backward, clearly realizing they didn't want to be part of whatever was about to happen. You're twisting my words, she stammered. I was speaking figuratively? I raised an eyebrow. Arson isn't figurative, ma'am. Jake returned from the car, holding a small evidence bag of his own. Sheriff, he said quietly, we found a can of lighter fluid in her trunk. Half empty. Karen's composure finally cracked. Her lips trembled. You can't! This is harassment! I'm the HOA president! I have rights. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. You do, Mom. The right to remain silent. Jake moved in smoothly, pulling out the cuffs. Karen Whitmore, you're under investigation for criminal trespass, property destruction, and arson, he said, his tone professional. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As he read her the rest of her rights, Karen sputtered, tears welling up in her eyes. You can't do this! I was trying to protect the community! He refused to follow the rules. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. The community doesn't answer to you, Karen, and neither do I. You wanted to make an example out of me. Now you've made one of yourself. Her eyes narrowed with hate, but the fear underneath it was louder. Jake guided her toward the cruiser as the other HOA members stood frozen, not daring to move. As the door shut behind her, I turned to the group. This isn't about lawn heights or mailbox colors anymore. This is about someone thinking they're above the law. Don't let that happen again. No one said a word. The only sound was the chirping of the birds and the hum of the cruiser's engine as it started up. As we drove back toward the main road, Karen's reflection glared at me through the rearview mirror. I didn't bother looking away. You know, I said, you could have just left me alone. You could have stayed in your little meetings, your bake sales, your power trips. But you came onto my land, and you destroyed what wasn't yours. That's not something I forgive easy. She turned her face away, staring out the window, silent now. Jake looked over at me, shaking his head. You think she really believes she could get away with it? She's spent her whole life getting away with things, I said quietly. People like her always think rules are for everyone else. We passed the blackened outline of my tractor as we drove back down Pine Creek Road. The smell of smoke still lingered, but the sight of her in the back seat made it sting a little less. By the time the sun dipped low again, the warrant for her property search was already signed, and her so-called OA empire was beginning to crumble. Neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak up started calling the station, one by one, telling their own stories. Fines, threats, harassment. Karen Whitmore had spent years trying to control everyone around her. Now, she was finally facing someone she couldn't control. And as the sheriff of Pine Creek County, I wasn't just going to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I was going to make sure no one like her ever terrorized this town again.